Hello and welcome back to our home renovation vlogs. Today we are sharing the first part of our dining room transformation. So this is a view of how our dining area looked before. At this point we had started a little bit of prep work, as you'll see, by putting up some plastic sheeting to shield the lounge area, which is on the other side. The old parquet flooring which we used to have in the lounge was still in here, and the dark green wall colour, which again was also in the lounge, and of course the wall panelling, all from previous owners of the house. Aside from the new windows which we had installed back in September last year, nothing had been done in this area because we knew what we wanted to do from the moment we moved in, but as with everything, had to save up some money. And now, just over a year after moving in, we finally had the budget to do it. So as you can see here, the main space of the dining area led into this narrow room, which to be honest was more like a corridor. And then that led into the garage, which was also being converted at the same time as this dining area project, and that will be in a separate video very soon. So for us, this random room / corridor was a complete waste of space, so we decided that we wanted to enlarge our dining area by knocking down this wall. So we calculated that removing it would give us an extra 2 meters in length to add onto our dining area, which then meant that we could have a large 10-person dining table for entertaining friends and family, something that we've always wanted to have. Work began on this project back in November last year, and we did have to get plans drawn up by an architect and then submitted to our local council for building regs to sign off. The plans for the dining area wall demolition and the garage conversion were all part of the same project, so they were all on the same plans, which were submitted to the council back at the end of 2021, and then they were approved about 3 or 4 months later. So entering the room via the old garage, here we have the progress after the first day of having our builders in. Simon and I are pretty good at DIY, if I do say so myself, but when it comes to big projects like this and wall demolition, we will leave that to the professionals. So as you can see, that old external dividing wall started to come down bit by bit, and you could already get a sense of how much bigger the dining area was going to be. Now, as this was an external wall, that means it was load bearing, so a steel beam was required as per our plans to bear the load instead of the wall. So until that beam went in, these support posts were used to support that load whilst the builders did their thing. Now if we fast forward to a few days into the project, you can see that the whole wall had been removed and the large steel beam had been put in place. As you can see, this does mean that it sits lower than the ceiling, which is often the case with renovations of existing homes, but this didn't really bother us. We've got beams in several other areas of the house already. Some new brickwork had to be built up from a slither of the old external wall which was left as a support to meet the beam on both ends. Our next day of progress shows the metal supports under the beam gone, as that structure had been completed and deemed secure and fully supported. And as you'll also see, that old parquet flooring had been taken up and any last remains of wall panelling removed. Now, our dining area is raised up from the rest of the ground level of the house, and we thought about this long and hard and decided to keep it that way rather than levelling it out. For us, it makes it just a little bit more of a feature, given that we have quite an open plan feel to our main living space. So here preparation had been done for the floor to be levelled out with screed. Boards had been put in place on both steps up to the dining area, so that's one from the kitchen and one from the lounge, and this was so that the screed wouldn't run down either side of those areas. The screed was to level out the already unlevel floor, and it was also there to fill in any gaps which had been made from the removal of that old wall. Something else which we changed was the placement of this window in what was the old corridor. So before, it wasn't central in this little alcove space, so we had our builders remove the old leaded window, chop out some of the brickwork on the other side, shimmy it along and then fill in the other side with some new brickwork. Now we did already have the new black aluminium window ready to replace this old UPVC window, but we waited until our window installers came to fit the new windows in the garage conversion so they could fit this one at the same time. So here you can now see the floor 24 hours after the screed was pumped and levelled. The boards that were put up on both the kitchen and the lounge entrances a couple of days prior did their job and created a nice flush finish for that screed to go up to, which then in future made it easier for our floor fitter to lay the flooring onto. Now, as the garage was also being done simultaneously, the floor in there had to be built up to meet this level, which you'll see in that video. So this screed could then run fluidly between these two new rooms, creating one level floor with no steps and no joins. We then had our builders back in to start plasterboarding any areas that needed it. So for example, the new steel beam, which was exposed in the ceiling, this was now completely boxed in with plasterboard and ready for our plasterer to come and start his prep work. After having done plenty of home renovations over the years, we always get a little bit excited when it gets to the stage where the plasterer can come in and start working their magic, because that means that we are almost at the finish line for mess. So our plasterer was able to pop by one evening and do a bit of prep work to the exposed brick on either end of the beam where the wall had previously been. You can't plaster directly onto exposed brick, so a bonding agent has to be applied and then scored so it gives the plaster something to properly grip onto. The bonding agent also needs to be able to go off before the plaster can be applied, so we were really grateful for him popping by one evening to get this first initial step done. And here we have the results after the first full day of plastering. Some further bonding had been done on that brickwork and also around the door frames to fill in any of the gaps that you could see before, and the ceiling had been plastered in both the new dining room and the new garage conversion, again as both projects were being done at the same time. After our second full day of plastering, the whole dining room had been plastered and it had already started to go off nicely to reveal that beautiful fresh plaster colour. Now that the dusty part was finally over, we could remove our Dexter style plastic sheeting to allow some air to start circulating in order to thoroughly dry out that plaster. Simon also had a whip round with Henry to pick up any dust off the floor so that it wouldn't start to transfer to other areas of the house. The dust is always the worst part of any renovation for me personally, and I'm always so happy when we're able to get to this point. Once the plaster had fully dried out, we could then apply our mist coat before painting properly. So we always do any painting ourselves because it saves on labour costs, and it's quite easy to do if you have the time and if, of course, you're able to do so. So with any fresh plaster, you shouldn't paint emulsion directly on top, because the emulsion will just sit on top of the fresh plaster and then it will flake off once it's dry. You should always apply a mist coat to freshly plastered surfaces, and this is basically a watered down paint which will absorb into the plaster rather than sit on top, giving a great base for then painting over. The ratio for watering down an emulsion is 3 parts paint to 1 part water. As I've mentioned in some of our other renovation videos, I always start with a brush and do the little fiddly areas first. So any corners and around sockets and switches. And if I'm painting alone, then I'll do this wall by wall so that I can then swap to a roller after brushing so that the two blend well whilst both wet. But Simon was also painting with me at this point to save time. So he was in charge of rollering and I was chief brush master. Now, as our floor hadn't been laid by this point, we didn't have to faff about with any dust sheets to protect the flooring, but when we got to the doorway to the kitchen, Simon did stand with a sheet to avoid getting any splashes on the kitchen floor, and the same went for the area in the lounge. Now, a mist coat is very watery paint, so once that's done, it will look very patchy, but don't worry, trust the process. Once the mist coat was dry, we could move on to painting with our chosen emulsion colour. which, no surprise, is Little Green Intelligent Matte in the shade Joanna. Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again, this is not only my favourite brand of paint, but my favourite shade. We've used it almost everywhere in the house so far because it's just so fresh, it's calming, and as with most Little Green shades, it has a real depth to it, so it changes throughout the day with various different lights. And just for reference, this particular room is a north-facing room, so naturally any colours will look cooler in a north-facing room as opposed to a south-facing room, like for example our kitchen and TV living area. Once the painting was done, our floor fitter came to install our flooring, which is LVT, luxury vinyl tiles. This is the same flooring that we have throughout the rest of the ground floor, and when we ordered this back in 2021, we made sure that we ordered enough for this project just in case this particular style had sold out by the time that we actually got around to doing this project. I then painted and Simon fit our new square edge skirting boards, and in what used to be the old corridor area, we did have a small radiator there, which our plumber relocated the pipes for before we got to the plastering stage. And instead we opted for a black vertical radiator, which is what we will eventually have replaced all our other old vertical radiators with throughout the house. We had a new door fitted to what is now our new utility room, previously the garage, and we went for the same black glass panel doors that we have in other areas of the house. As I did with the door to our ensuite, I am going to add some reeded film to this door so that it still lets in all the natural light but disguises the view of the utility once that's finished. We also swapped out the French doors that led into the kitchen for these sliding barn style doors. Again, the black with the glass panels so as to let in natural light and have an open feel even when the doors are closed. And these sliding doors are actually really great space savers. They sit flush to the wall so they don't open out into a room, taking up space. We considered pocket doors, but as this was a pretty big extra cost, as the walls either side would have had to be modified for the doors to then fit in, and as with any renovation, you have to consider your budget and if it's really worth the extra spend. But now, having had these doors for a couple of months, we both love them and we're really glad that we actually went for this option. Now, we do currently have some furniture and soft furnishings in this room already, but we have some bits to finish off the room still to buy. So I'm going to end part one of our dining room renovation here and save all of the home furnishings and finishing touches and the styling that will eventually turn it into our dining area for part two, which will be coming up very soon. Thank you as always for watching, and keep your eyes peeled for part one of the garage conversion video, which is coming your way over the next few weeks.